All right, we'll read verses 1 through 10 and get into the Beatitudes here. Matthew 5, 1 through 10. Seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him. And he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. I stopped there because we have another inclusion in this passage. The blessing of verse 3 and verse 10 is the same. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. John Gill, another esteemed commentator, and Spurgeon agree with this kind of division, as well as Ross, that verses 11 and 12 seem to fit better with 13 through 16 because you have a change of audience here. He says, Blessed are you when others revile you. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. So he turns from the crowd to his disciples in those last couple verses that have traditionally been included in the Beatitudes because they begin with the same word, blessed. So we're going to stop there in considering the Beatitudes, and we'll put the other two for later. What is a beatitude? The word beatitude comes from the Latin word for blessed. It has long been used to describe the blessings in this passage because the church used the Latin Vulgate for a millennium, and in that translation, each verse begins with the root of that word, beati. So, a beatitude. According to the Reformation Study Bible, blessed means more than the emotional state represented by the word happy. That's easy to know from our own lives. We have often been blessed by the Lord in situations where we were mourning, or sad, or grieving, or anything like that. It includes spiritual well-being, having the approval of God, and thus a destiny of delight in communion with the Creator. All right. Spurgeon emphasizes that we must not make the mistake of looking to the Beatitudes for the way of salvation. Rather, this passage describes the marks and evidences of those who have already been brought onto the way. According to Ross, the inclusion that I already described is used to show us that this passage is a unified portrait of the blessed souls who possess the kingdom of heaven. The portrait of kingdom citizens. It's not a list of achievements with a different reward attached to each one. It's not like a quarterly bonus or an exercise challenge or a video game mission where you receive a reward once you reach the goal. It's a description of what God's people do look like and the gracious blessings he promises upon the gracious behavior he has worked in them. Here, Jesus is describing reality. Those described in the first half of each beatitude are currently and truly blessed in the way described in the second part. Spurgeon says the blessing is in every case in the present tense, blessed are, a happiness to be now enjoyed and delighted in. Blessed is the first moment of the Christian life on earth, and blessed is the last. Blessed is the spark which trembles in the flax, and blessed is the flame which ascends to heaven in a holy ecstasy. Blessed is the bruised reed, and blessed is the tree of the Lord, which is full of sap, the cedar of Lebanon, which the Lord hath planted. All right, with that introduction, we'll get into the Beatitudes one by one. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Ryle says the poor in spirit are those who are humble, lowly-minded, self-abased, deeply convinced of their own sinfulness in God's sight. So we know this. We see this in Psalm 51. Against you, you only, have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight. Humility is the very first letter in the alphabet of Christianity. Without humility, our pride deflects every lesson we are meant to learn from our trials and every piece of counsel that we receive from our friends. Henry defines poverty of spirit as a gracious disposition of soul by which we are emptied of self in order to be filled with Jesus Christ, to be poor in spirit. He says that to be poor in spirit is first to be contentedly poor, willing to be emptied of worldly wealth and worldly goods if God pleases, bringing our mind to our condition, bringing our spirits and our desires down to our temporal state. Philippians 4:12, I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. And Job said, the Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Secondly, to be poor in spirit is to come off from all confidence in our own righteousness and strength, that we may depend only upon the merit of Christ for our justification, and the Spirit and grace of Christ for our sanctification. That broken and contrite spirit with which the publican cried for mercy to a poor sinner is this poverty of spirit that this verse describes. God, be merciful to me, a sinner. What is their blessing? Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Those who exalt themselves get the glory of the kingdoms of earth, but the humble obtain the glory of the kingdom of heaven. We have the story of Lazarus, Luke 16. Abraham told the rich man, "Child, remember that you in your lifetime received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in anguish." Verse 4, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." We should be more sorrowful about sin, especially our own, than about anything on earth. Psalm 51:17, "The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not despise." We should also mourn over lost souls. Psalm 119, verse 136, "My eyes shed streams of tears because people do not keep your law." We should mourn over afflictions. Romans 12:15, "Weep with those who weep." However, worldly sorrow that springs from pride and self-pity is excluded. That's mentioned in 2 Corinthians 7. What is the blessing of those who mourn? They shall be comforted, here or in glory. Psalm 16:11, if I can find it here. "You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore." And Revelation 21:4, "He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away." Henry says that heaven will be heaven indeed to those who go mourning to it. Psalm 126:5-6, "Those who sow in tears shall reap with shouts of joy. He who goes out weeping, bearing the seed for sowing, shall come home with shouts of joy, bringing his sheaves with him." Verse 5, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." There are many ways to define meekness, or many aspects to the virtue, I should say. I think the best way to summarize it is a combination of gentleness, patience, and a forgiving spirit. Henry points us to Titus 3:2. "To speak evil of no one." He's telling Titus, Paul's writing to Titus, reminding him, telling him to remind the church of these things. To speak evil of no one, to avoid quarreling, to be gentle, and to show perfect courtesy to all. The meek can bear provocation without being inflamed by it, can show their displeasure when there is occasion for it without being transported into indecencies, can be cool when others are hot. They are the meek who are rarely and not easily provoked, but quickly and easily pacified, who would rather forgive 20 injuries than revenge one. Spurgeon says that meekness is particularly manifest in dealing with others. This is an interesting sort of mental picture. A hermit can't exercise his meekness until you put him with trying folk who will test his temper, perhaps trespassers. This is a long quote from Spurgeon that I really appreciated in describing the meek. "They know that it is necessary that temptations come," that's from Matthew 18:7, "yet they are too meek either to give offense or to take offense. They do not merely forgive 7 times, but 70 times 7. In fact, they often do not feel as if anything had been done that needed any forgiveness, for they have not taken it as an affront. They consider that a mistake was made, so they are not angry at it. Now, the meek man may be angry for a moment. He would not be a man if he were not. But there is such a thing as being angry and yet not sinning. And the meek man turns his anger wholly upon the evil and away from the person who did the wrong. And then he is as ready to do that man a kindness as if he had never transgressed against him at all." This, out of the 20 verses, this verse was the one that was most right to my heart. Definitely convicting. The blessing of the meek is that they shall inherit the earth. This is a direct reference to Psalm 37:29. "The righteous shall inherit the land and dwell upon it forever." And I think the best interpretation of this is the new earth, as in the new heavens and the new earth. And I have Gill and Spurgeon on to thank for that perspective. Revelation 5:10, you have made them a kingdom and priests to our God, and they shall reign on the earth. Verse 6, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Rouse says this verse speaks of those who desire above all things to be entirely conformed to the mind of God. The righteousness here means two things, both the righteousness of Christ that justifies us by faith and a growing conformity to the likeness of Christ as the Spirit sanctifies us. Henry says that we must desire righteousness as one who is hungry and thirsty, desires meat and drink, and cannot be satisfied with anything but meat and drink, and will be satisfied when he receives them, even though he may be lacking other things. The attitude is that of Rachel in Genesis 31. Give me these or else I die. And the blessing is that they shall be satisfied. God alone can fill a soul, and his grace is adequate to its desires. Jeremiah, 31:25. I will satisfy the weary soul, and every languishing soul I will replenish. Verse 7, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Henry says the merciful are those who are piously and charitably inclined, both to have compassion on and to help those who are suffering. A man may be truly merciful who does not have the means to be bountiful or liberal and generous, so he may yet be truly merciful, because God accepts the desire for the deed. We must have compassion on the souls of others and love them. Pity the ignorant and instruct them, the careless and warn them, those who are in a state of sin, and snatch them as brands out of the burning. We must have compassion on those who are melancholy, sorrowful, or depressed, and comfort them. Isaiah 35:3, strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees. Isaiah 40 verse 1, comfort my people, says your God. On those, we must have compassion on those, be merciful on those who are in want, and supply them. James 2:15 and 16, if a brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, be warmed and filled, without giving them the things needed for the body, what good is that? 1 John 3:17, but if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? And the blessing of the merciful is that they shall obtain mercy. Mercy with men when they need it, and especially mercy with God. Psalm 18:25, with the merciful you show yourself merciful. With the blameless man you show yourself blameless. Proverbs 19:17, whoever is generous to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will repay him for his deed. Matthew 25:34-35. Then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. And then James 2:13 applies if we aren't merciful. Judgment is without mercy to one who has shown no mercy. Verse 8, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. According to Henry, true Christianity lies in the heart, in the purity of the heart. We must be undefiled, unpolluted, pure from fleshly lusts, meaning unchaste thoughts and desires, and pure from worldly lusts, meaning covetousness. Jeremiah 4:14, O Jerusalem, wash your heart from evil, that you may be saved. How long shall your wicked thoughts lodge within you? Psalm 24:4-5, he who has clean hands and a pure heart, who does not lift up his soul to what is false, and does not swear deceitfully, he will receive blessing from the Lord and righteousness from the God of his salvation. Psalm 51 verse 10 must be the cry of our hearts. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. The blessing of the pure in heart is that they shall see God. A quote from Henry here. It is the perfection of the soul's happiness to see God. Seeing him as we may by faith in our present state is a heaven upon earth. And seeing him as we shall in the future state is the heaven of heaven. To see him forever and never lose the sight of him, this is heaven's happiness. Psalm 17:15. Where am I? As for me, I shall behold your face in righteousness. When I awake, I shall be satisfied with your likeness. Verse 9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. This has two applications. First is peaceable spirit, and second, a peaceable life. I'll treat the first briefly. We must love and desire and delight in peace. We must seek to be peaceful. 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 11. Aspire to live quietly and to mind your own affairs and to work with your hands, as we instructed you. Secondly, a peaceable life. This is a quote. I don't have who it's from. Sorry about that. I think it's from Spurgeon. We should industriously, as far as we can, seek to preserve the peace that it be not broken, and to recover it when it is broken. We should seek to listen to proposals of peace from others, and where distance is between brethren and neighbors, to do all we can to accommodate it and to be repairers of the breaches. The making of peace is sometimes a thankless office, and it is the lot of him who parts afraid to have blows on both sides, yet it is a calling we must not neglect. The blessing of the peacemakers is that they shall be called the children of God. In making peace, it will be an evidence to themselves that they are so. Others will call them children of God by seeing their peacefulness, and God will grant them the title himself. Verse 10. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Christ here is speaking of those who suffer because they will not sin against their consciences, who suffer for doing good. 1 John 3:13. Do not be surprised, brothers, that the world hates you. Romans 8:36. As it is written, for your sake we are being killed all the day long. We are regarded as sheep to be slaughtered. This is clearly something that we don't experience in great measure in our country, but we are hearing and reading and seeing reports of increasing persecution across the world. So this verse may be more applicable in our situation, to be faithful in prayer and to be grateful for the blessing of our brothers and sisters across the world to whom the kingdom of heaven belongs. Henry says that whatever pretense our persecutors may have, it is the power of godliness that they have an enmity to. It is really Christ and his righteousness that are maligned, hated, and persecuted. Psalm 69:9. For zeal for your house has consumed me, and the reproaches of those who reproach you have fallen on me. The blessing, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. They have at present a sure title to it, and sweet foretastes of it, and shall ere long be in possession of it. God will provide that those who lose for him, though it be life itself, shall not lose by him in the end. Heaven at last will be an abundant recompense for all the difficulties we meet with in our way. This is that which has borne up the suffering saints in all ages, this joy set before them. That's from Henry. Concluding the Beatitudes here, I am indebted to Mark Ross for this insight. Ultimately, the disciples of Christ look like their master himself. Christ is meek and lowly in heart. The food for which he hungered was to do his Father's will. He mourns over the lost. Though he came preaching peace and showing mercy, he was despised and rejected of men, persecuted and afflicted, and at last delivered over to death. Kingdom citizens are like their king. The sons of God are like their God. We move on to the next passage. I will read verses 11 through 16. Blessed are you, and others revile you, and persecute you, and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Again, the change in the tense to the second person plural indicates that Christ now turns from the crowds to his disciples. John 15:19 is going to help us understand how verses 11 and 12 tie in with the metaphors of salt and light. If you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. We have been chosen out of the world. We remain in it in this life, but we are not of it. Because of this, we are persecuted on Christ's account, because we are separate from the world for his sake. So now Christ uses salt and light to describe both how we are different and how we are to be different. First, you may be wondering how, like I have for years, how salt can lose its saltiness, and the Reformation Study Bible came in handy once again. The salt deposits along the Dead Sea contain not just sodium chloride, but a variety of other minerals as well. So the salt can become useless when the rain washes out its saltiness over the years and only leaves the other minerals behind. Ryle points out that salt has its own taste, preserves other substances from corruption, imparts a portion of its taste to everything it is mixed with, and is useful only so long as it maintains its saltiness. Likewise, we are distinct from the world. The influence of the gospel through us preserves the world from utter chaos. We have an impact on the world while we are here, and we are successful in our commission only so long as our conduct remains distinct from the world around us. Ross focuses on the preserving characteristic of salt. The metaphor speaks to the preserving influence the disciples have on those around them and on the world as a whole, hindering the rapid decay that would otherwise take place. It is indeed precisely this influence that makes them so hated by the world, when in fact the world should be grateful for them. And Ross draws out the light metaphor as well. It is also this transformed character that makes them the light of the world. We'll look at 2 Corinthians 4:6. For God, who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. And Philippians 2:15. That you may be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish, in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world. The lamp's purpose is to give light. In the same way, Christ has lighted his people with his own light, and we are intended to shine in all the world, giving light to all in the house. In this passage, we see that imperatives follow from the indicative descriptions that are given of the disciples. They are salt, so they must not lose their saltiness. They are lights, so they are to let their light shine in order that glory may be given to their Father in heaven. The lesson here is this: who you are determines how you must live. We belong to Christ. We must live as Christ. Verses 17 through 20, moving on to the final section of the passage here. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot, will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. With this passage, sort of a strange cutoff in Ryle's divisions and how we have divided up teaching it, we move into the main body of the Sermon on the Mount. And I've, as before, gleaned heavily from Ryle, Henry, and Ross in this section. These verses are actually the key to understanding the rest of the sermon. Note as we go in that there is a forcefulness to this passage. It's almost as if Jesus is saying, if you only take away one thing, remember this. I have not come to abolish the law or the prophets, but to fulfill them. What Jesus is addressing in verse 17 are the concerns of his audience who had the law and the prophets as their rule and the scribes and Pharisees as their example. He shows them that they are right in the former, but wrong in the latter. Let not the pious Jews who have an affection for the law and the prophets fear that I come to destroy them. And let not the profane Jews who have a disaffection to the law and the prophets and are weary of that yoke hope that I am come to destroy them. He says, I have come to fulfill them. What does this mean? The Reformation Study Bible says, in fulfilling the law, Jesus does not alter, replace, or nullify the former commands. Rather, he establishes their true intent and purpose in his teaching and accomplishes them in his obedient life. The law and the prophets point forward to Christ. Indeed, that is their purpose. Christ fulfills the law and the prophets in several senses. First, he is the answer to the promises of the law and the predictions of the prophets, which all bore witness to him. Secondly, he fulfilled the ceremonial law by giving his life as a ransom for many, and by providing the true means of cleansing from moral corruption, so that the blood of bulls and goats is no longer necessary. The ceremonial law is no longer in force since Christ has come. He is the fullness of those types, the substance of all those shadows. Thirdly, he fulfilled the moral law too, by keeping it perfectly and by paying its penalty of eternal death in the place of his elect. He was made under the law and obeyed it perfectly, Galatians 4:4. God sent forth his Son, born of woman, born under the law. But the moral law still applies, as Christ affirms indeed in the rest of the sermon, because it is the expression of God's eternal character. He says, do not relax the law, but teach it. Far from being indifferent to the law's demands, as we have already seen, Christ's disciples hunger and thirst after this righteousness and mourn over the shortfalls in their lives. They cannot be content with the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, which is satisfied by matters of ceremonial detail while neglecting the weightier matters, or with outward appearance while neglecting the purity of the heart. The righteousness taught by the law and the prophets and expounded in the Sermon on the Mount by Jesus is far broader, far deeper than that. Indeed, of a whole different kind. And then finally, he says, your righteousness must exceed that of the scribes and Pharisees. And this is from Henry. The righteousness which Christ came to establish by this rule must exceed that of the scribes and Pharisees. They were partial in the law and laid out the most stress upon the ritual part of it. But we must be universal and give God our whole hearts in everything that we do. They minded only the outside, but we must make conscience of inside godliness. They aimed at the praise and applause of men, but we must aim at acceptance with God. They were proud of what they did in religion and trusted to it as a righteousness. But we, when we have done all, must deny ourselves and say we are unworthy servants and trust only in the righteousness of Christ. And thus, we may go beyond the scribes and Pharisees because his righteousness is perfect and it is ours. Thanks be to God. We are concluding far earlier than I expected. I do have some extra good kind of thoughts and bits and pieces that I can definitely share if we run out of questions and conversation. This is good. I can fit more in next time. We will conclude with some closing thoughts from Ryle. First, and these are in your outline so you can read along with me. The sanctification of the New Testament saint ought to exceed that of him who had nothing but the Old Testament for his guide. The more light we have, the more we ought to love God. The more clearly we see our own complete and full forgiveness in Christ, the more heartily ought we to work for his glory. We know what it costs to redeem us, far better than the Old Testament saints did. We have read what happened in Gethsemane and on Calvary, and they only saw it dimly and indistinctly as a thing yet to come. To this end, let us beware of despising the Old Testament, and especially the Ten Commandments. The coming of Christ did not alter the position of the Ten Commandments one hair's breadth. If anything, it exalted and raised their authority. Romans 3:31. Do we then overthrow the law by this faith? By no means. On the contrary, we uphold the law. Isaiah 42:21. The Lord was pleased for his righteousness' sake to magnify his law and make it glorious. The moral law, as summarized in the Ten Commandments, is God's eternal measure of right and wrong. By it, we have the knowledge of sin. By it, the Spirit shows men their need of Christ and drives them to him. To it, Christ refers his people as their rule and guide for holy living. In its right place, it is just as important as the gospel.